Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Well, it's going to be quite a Wednesday here on the Three Martini Lunch. You are going to get 4 martinis for the price of 3, which of course would happen on the day that Jim Garrity's voice is struggling a little bit. And to make matters even more chaotic, none of them are good. No good martinis today. So, Jim, quite a day already.
Greg, we're having our special guest commentator, Barry White, coming at you with some easy listening with my voice, a good octave lower than it usually is. Or I could do James Earl Jones. That's where I am. But I'm going to soldier on. I'm a little bit above RFK Jr. right now when it comes to voice quality. Not by much.
Yesterday, of course, the seismic political news was out of Arizona, kind of followed pretty well on the heels of our discussion about Trump's views on abortion. The Arizona Supreme Court, by a vote of 4-2, upheld an abortion law out of 1864, which basically said abortions are only legal in the event of a medical emergency, so life of the mother. And of course, that would make sense if that was the law on the books prior to Roe v. Wade taking effect. That would be the law on the books after the Dobbs decision that would remove Roe v. Wade. Life of the mother used to be a pretty common conservative perspective, but the reaction yesterday on both sides was quite something, Jim. First of all, you've got Joe Biden talking about Republican elected officials are committed to ripping away women's freedom. Mark Kelly, the Arizona Supreme Court just set reproductive rights in our state back by 2 centuries. Good math. And now Arizona women will lose the right to an abortion. This will criminalize doctors for doing their jobs and have a devastating effect on the health of Arizona women and families. Bill Pascrell echoing Biden. He's not even from Arizona. He's from New Jersey. He says, Arizona just upheld a total ban on women's freedom. And then on the Republican side, Jim, we kind of saw what you said yesterday, where Democrats are like, yes, abortion should be legal. And Republicans are, no. Kinda, well, maybe. David Schweikert, Republican congressman. I do not support today's ruling from the Arizona Supreme Court. This issue should be decided by Arizonans, not legislated from the bench. I encourage the state legislature to address this issue immediately. It did, just a long time ago. State lawmaker there saying, I voted to limit abortions to 15 weeks. This ruling is not what I wanted. I want to go back to that. Kari Lake is the most amazing here, though. The former gubernatorial candidate, now the Senate candidate. She says, I oppose today's ruling, and I'm calling on Katie Hobbs and the state legislature to come up with an immediate common sense solution that Arizonans can support. Ultimately, Arizona voters will make the decision on the ballot come November. So Kari Lake appalled by what the majority on the Arizona Supreme Court said, which is also different than what Kari Lake said in 2022. This is her twice as a candidate before the Republican primary for governor in 2022, but at a time when everyone knew that the Supreme Court was going to be rendering a decision on Dobbs within the coming months.
Obviously, I think Roe v. Wade should be overturned, and I think the Supreme Court, I have a good feeling that they're going to do the right thing this time. And again, I'll echo what Steve just said. We have a great law on the books right now. If that happens, we will be a state where we will not be taking the lives of our unborn anymore.
Great law on the books. Here's what she said 4 months later in June of 2022.
I'm incredibly thrilled that we are going to have a great law that's already on the books. So it will prohibit abortion in Arizona, and I think we're going to be paving the way and setting course for other states to follow.
Jim, just a total fraud on this issue. She got caught. We'll see if anything is going to happen more in the immediate aftermath of this. You've got a Republican legislature and a Democratic governor, so we'll see if they can come up with some legislation. I assume there's going to be some effort to do that. But watching the Democrats light their hair on fire and watching Republicans get exposed for not being quite as pro-life as they wanted voters to believe is quite something to watch.
Yeah, if you've ever suspected that there are a bunch of Republican office makers and candidates who were willing to talk the talk but not willing to walk the walk, you feel really vindicated today. And I thought back to I think it was probably either Rick Santorum ran for president in 2012, 2016. And in one of the debates, the moderator really went after him. And Rick Santorum, openly, outspokenly, resolutely 100% pro-life. And my boss, Rich Lowry, just made the observation that the moderator really wanted to trip him up on it, and Santorum knew exactly what he thought and why he thought it, and clearly had done a lot of thinking about the philosophy, about the values, about the law, about how the law would work, and all that kind of stuff. And he just speaking off the cuff, gave a masterful pro-life answer. And it just kind of says that there's no substitute for thinking through things for yourself. And I can't, and again, Rick Santorum is not my favorite Republican by any stretch of the imagination, but I do believe that he believes what he actually believes, that he's thought it through, and he knows how to make the case for it. Kari Lake kind of appeared on the scene out of nowhere after a long career in television news in 2022. And I somehow find it less than shocking that people who've been in the Republican Party for about 20 minutes or so, yes, it's an exaggeration, but people who just joined and just that suddenly they turn to a weather vane. That, did I say I was totally pro-life? I didn't mean that. That was then. This is now. I'm totally the opposite. I misspoke. When I said it was a great law, I meant it was a terrible law. It really is cringe-inducing. It really, I think Kari Lake has a lot of weaknesses as a candidate. I think they got exposed in 2022, and I don't have high hopes for 2024. We'll see how things shake out, but just kind of embarrassing and a sign of pro-life Republicans, or people who've been saying they're pro-life Republicans, really getting wobbly knees once the actual effects of what they say they wanted for a long time is on the verge of going into effect. So look, we'll see how this shakes out, but it's really hard to see how this helps Republicans in Arizona, at least for now.
Yeah, in the present political circumstances, this will probably give Democrats some political momentum, but that's a different question than where these Republican figures have stood on this issue over time. So watching them kind of twist in the wind because they consider their political survival more important than the survival in the womb, that's quite a thing to watch.
I was going to say, if you're going to change your mind, at least give us a sense of why. And if your attitude is, well, I was pro-life, but then I realized I might lose the election, so now I'm not.
That would at least be honest. So my takeaways from this, Jim, are A, find someone who loves you as much as Democrats love abortion. Just don't find someone who loves abortion as much as the Democrats love abortion, because that is on a twisted scale. And when you look at where Republicans are on cultural issues, they don't say much about marriage anymore. They let the issue go through on the codifying of marriage. Now it's abortion. They don't stand up for spending anymore. There are some issues they do care about: tax policy, guns usually, some others. But honestly, I think the biggest reason to vote for Republicans is because the Democrats are even crazier, not because Republicans on a lot of these issues are principled.
Yeah, and that's a less than ideal sales pitch. Yes. We're slightly less crazy. Vote for us.
Right. I'll tell you what's not crazy at all, though. The great deals you can get at Fast Growing Trees, which is the biggest online nursery in the United States with more than 10,000 different kinds of plants and more than 2 million happy customers right here in the U.S. You can grow lemon, avocado, olive, or fig trees inside your home on top of the wide variety of houseplants they have available.
Fast Growing Trees makes it easy to order online, and your plants will be shipped directly to your door in just 1 or 2 days. And along with their 30-day Alive and Thrive guarantee, they offer free plant consultation forever.
You can have great plants that last for years. We just did a little bit of a shift. I took the big Monstera plant up to my wife's study, and we, of course, now have the dill and the basil and the oregano. Right now, Fast Growing Trees has the best deals online, up to half off on select plants, and listeners to the 3 Martini Lunch get an additional 15% off their first purchase when using the code Martini at checkout. That's an additional 15% off at fastgrowingtrees.com and using the code Martini at checkout. Fastgrowingtrees.com, code Martini. Offer is valid for a limited time, and tell them that we sent you. All right, Jim, on to our next bad martini now, and this is more bad news as it relates to the economy. We just talked earlier in the week about how the March jobs report and the supposedly great addition of over 300,000 new jobs was almost entirely part-time work. Not ideal. Now, the Consumer Price Index accelerated at a faster than expected pace in March, pushing inflation higher and likely dashing hopes that the Federal Reserve will be able to cut interest rates anytime soon. This is from CNBC. The CPI rose 0.4 for the month and putting the 12-month inflation rate at 3.5% or 0.3% higher than February. Economists surveyed by Dow Jones had been looking for a 0.3% gain and a 3.4% year-over-year level. Excluding food and energy components, core CPI also accelerated 0.4 on a monthly basis, while rising 3.8% from a year ago, which also beat expectations. I always love how people like Paul Krugman normally say, well, if you take out food and energy and housing, the inflation's not that bad. But Jim, they keep saying that they're fixing this problem. And when you tack it onto the previous years, they are not. Things keep getting more expensive.
Yeah. And, a Morning Jolt earlier in the week was all about the state of the economy, all the different ways in which, Paul Krugman, the Biden administration officials, Democrats, progressive columnist types, talking heads, they're all befuddled. Why are people so down on the economy? And I think you can point to everything from inflation, probably first and foremost, but also you can look at everything from actually the company, as we discussed earlier in the week, part-time jobs being created instead of full-time jobs, gas prices, which, again, they're not cheap. It's not, we're by the standards of the year, we're low, but also it's early April. We're heading towards the summer driving season. It's probably going to go up past $4 a gallon in a whole bunch of places in the country. Now in California, it's well past $5 a gallon. Some of this is because of the refinery issues and things like that. But you throw that out there, and then finally, so the good news is new cars are slightly less expensive than they were after hitting record highs. The bad news is that what you can get for your trade-in is actually plummeting, and so there are a whole bunch of people who owe more on. People talk about being underwater on your house. You have mortgage for a certain amount, and then the house loses its value, and so you actually owe more on your house than it's worth if you resold it. A lot of people are in that situation with cars. Now they say when you drive off a lot, it loses a big chunk of its value, but just all kinds of economic pressures on people, and they're feeling really lousy. Greg, it's not the lead headline over at the New York Times, but I do think it's very revealing. And so if somebody wants to say, "Oh, this should be a good martini," if you're pulling for Trump, I could see that argument. A hot inflation report is a blow to President Biden. Now, look, this inflation report, maybe it thinks it's hot. I think it's kind of mid. It's got a nice personality. No, but you can see the immediate interpretation of it is, oh, this is really bad for Biden's reelection campaign, and it's also bad for lots of Americans who want to buy things, and everything is still continue. And the other thing is, I think that if the administration's message had been, we're fighting inflation. We're still, but they kept going around spiking the football and saying the moment they got good news, oh no, this thing is fixed, and you're always putting yourself at risk that things will get worse or that other things will happen. You saw the utter abandonment of Bidenomics as a rallying cry for the Biden campaign, and I'm not surprised by that. But I just think that this will add to people's perception, and I think it's not just is 3.5 a particularly high number? When you've had it at 9 or at 9%, that doesn't seem that bad. Although I noticed the chart that's on the New York Times goes all the way back to 1965, so it kind of by that far it doesn't look that bad right now. But 3.5% is year over year is still high. Usually it's around 2%. It's a little bit higher than normal, but also again, as you have pointed out on this podcast many times, it's cumulative. It's 3.5% from what it was in April 2023, which is above what it was on 2022, and each successive year. And we've been dealing with this for the better part of 3.5 years now. So bad news for the country. I suppose bad news for good news for Trump, if you want to make that argument. But I'd really rather not have the country have to go through another long stretch of nobody feeling like they can afford anything. Just to have a slight impact on the presidential campaign.
And there had been some rumblings that the Fed was planning to actually lower interest rates, and maybe this inflation report will tap the brakes on that, because if you do bring interest rates down, prices are going to end up going up a lot more. And so you had Biden suggesting that the rates ought to go down. You had Democratic pollsters suggesting they could go down. And I was saying in our notes earlier today, I remember when George W. Bush came into office and made one small comment about where he thought interest rates ought to go. And he was just pilloried throughout mainstream media for how dare you meddle in the independent actions of the Fed. But apparently it's okay if it's a Democratic administration. All right, third bad martini, but there are four, and the fourth one is fun, even though if it's completely insane. Let's go to the Middle East, and President Biden wants an immediate ceasefire. He wants an immediate ceasefire that will last 6 to 8 weeks, so there can be full infusion of humanitarian relief in Gaza. Israel, on a number of occasions, has usually been open to such a thing if there are hostage releases. And Biden has usually made that a condition of a 6 to 8 week ceasefire. But this time, he didn't specifically say that. He did an interview with Univision where he said, quote, "What I'm calling for is for the Israelis to just call for a ceasefire. Allow for the next 6-8 weeks total access to all food and medicine going into the country. I've spoken with everyone from the Saudis to the Jordanians to the Egyptians. They're prepared to move in. They're prepared to move this food in, and I think there's no excuse not to provide the medical and food needs of the people. It should be done now. Well, guess who rejected the ceasefire? Hamas. Hamas rejected the ceasefire because they don't want a ceasefire. They want a complete, permanent end to the war, which obviously is not going to happen. But Jim, when it's Hamas that says no, I guess there's no outrage anymore from the podium.
Well, I was going to say, whether Biden wants to admit it or not, what he's calling for is a unilateral Israeli ceasefire against Hamas, because we all know, first of all, Hamas has broken all previous ceasefires, and they have rejected every offer on the table with, massive amounts of, imprisoned Palestinians being released, usually sometimes a 40 to 1 type ratio, absolutely refuses to release the hostages. And so, there's kind of this giant charade going on that we are dealing with what we in the West would consider to be rational actors. That if there's some carrot big enough offered at the table, that Hamas will say, okay, we'll release the hostages, and we're willing to sit down, and we'll stop trying to kill all the Jews and drive all the Israelis into the sea. This is who they are. This is what they want to do. This is the entire purpose of Hamas is to destroy kill every Israeli they can find. It's just kind of, unreasonable to ask the Israelis to say, we need you guys to stop fighting. We need you guys, I know they're shooting at you. We really want you to stop shooting back. And you send more food to them. You allow more people to resupply them. That Hamas will then take and then sell. And then Hamas will use that money to buy more weapons to kill you. This is the good deal we've got, and we really think this is going to work out well for you. And unsurprisingly, the Israelis are like, what are you talking about? Of course we don't want to do this. And so this is what happens when your entire foreign policy gets turned on its head because you're afraid you're going to lose the state of Michigan.
No, that's exactly right. And my colleague Sarah Carter had on her podcast earlier in the week David Friedman, the former ambassador to Israel. And he said one of the things that's driving U.S. policy, in addition to being worried about Michigan, but what's going on campuses and other places, perhaps the UN, is that there's this notion that whichever side of a conflict is weaker somehow has the moral high ground. It's kind of like the oppressor versus the oppressed idea. All you have to do is look at the facts here to prove what the truth is. I mean, who started this? How did they start it? Now we're punishing the people who are trying to end it the right way.
On October 7th, how much of an oppressor did Israel look like? By the way, Obama had the same philosophy, and he actually explicitly writes about this in his first autobiography of his presidential years. I guess the second one is still in progress. But he talks about it, and he said that because Israel was the stronger party, it was obligated to make the first move and make the first concessions. And you might be able to argue Israel compared to Hamas is a stronger entity. You might be able to make an argument that Israel compared to Hezbollah is a stronger entity. But when you add up Hamas and Hezbollah and Palestinian Islamic Jihad and the Iranians and all the other hostile states, Syria, everybody else who hate you, all of a sudden Israel doesn't look like the stronger party. Israel has looks like it's surrounded by hostile enemies. Egypt's not as hostile as it used to be. They signed a peace deal. Jordan signed a peace deal. But the populations of those countries are still vehemently anti-Israel and anti-Semitic. So Israel, the actual circumstances of Israel feeling like it's surrounded, outgunned, outmanned. Why, when Obama or Biden goes to them and says, why aren't you making more concessions? Of course they look back and they'll be like, first of all, Bibi Netanyahu did not get where he was by making unilateral concessions. Right? And the Israelis have not survived for 75 years by making unilateral concessions to people who want to kill them. There's kind of this there's this theory that's in some sort of academic classroom of how this ought to work. And then there's the reality on the ground, and it just feels like these people in Biden, and for that matter, the Obama administration, just don't want to deal with the reality. It doesn't matter how much you think you know Israel's best interest more than they do. The Israelis get to decide what their best interest is, and right now it's not to, stop shooting at the guys who are trying to kill them.
No, that's exactly right, and I hope I don't butcher the quote, but I think it was Golda Meir who said, there will be peace in the Middle East when the Palestinians love their own children more than killing ours. I think there's a lot of truth to that. By the way, in the New York Post story, it says a White House official told the Post that Biden was not changing current policy in terms of the call for a unilateral ceasefire. So another cleanup on aisle 4.
Yet another edition of what he meant to say was the exact opposite of what he actually said.
All right, let's talk about 4Patriots. Great deals over there. 4patriots.com/martini. You can get fantastic deals right now on the Leafy Greens Hydro Garden Seed Kit, the 4Patriots Bountiful Green Plant Food, the Sauna Wrap Therapeutic Blanket, and the Solar Go Fridge with solar panel. But the biggest thing going on right now is the return of the deluxe 3-month survival food kits. They are back in stock after being sold out for more than a year, now with new and improved recipes on things like pancakes, mac and cheese, Aztec chili, potato soup, and spaghetti and lasagna. They're designed to last 25 years in disaster-resistant packaging, 100% satisfaction guaranteed. You can stash food away and be confident that when any kind of disaster strikes, you and your family will be ready. Go to 4patriots.com/martini to get the deluxe 3-month survival food kit and the peace of mind that you deserve. Plus, get free shipping on orders over $97. That's the number 4patriots.com/martini. That's 4patriots.com/martini. All right, Jim, a lot of heavy and sobering news there in our first 3 terrible martinis, but we do have one more, and it's a crazy martini. Sheila Jackson Lee, who just won't go away. She's been in Congress since, I think, sometime in the mid-90s. She was on the Judiciary Committee during the time
the Republican Revolution brought her along. It kind of balanced out.
She was on Newt's coattails, apparently, there in downtown Houston. But yeah, she was on the impeachment committee at the time of the Clinton impeachment. She's got a not good reputation as a boss up on Capitol Hill, but she also says some really odd and bizarre things. And one of them came on Monday. She was at some event, it looks like, in her district, commemorating the solar eclipse because the path of totality did pass through the Lone Star State. But here is what she said. I assume this is to school kids. Just sheer nonsense about the sun, the moon, what a full moon is. Just enjoy.
And sometimes you've heard the word full moon. Sometimes you need to take the opportunity just to come out and see a full moon is that complete rounded circle, which is made up mostly of gases. And that's why the question is why or how could we as humans live on the moon? Are the gases such that we could do that? The sun is a mighty powerful heat that is almost impossible to go near the sun. The moon is more manageable, and you will see in a moment, or not a moment, you'll see in a couple of years that NASA is going back to the moon.
Oh, it's almost too hot to get near the sun, Jim. That's a new one. And also, I love the fact that
fact check, true.
Almost.
The sun is too hot. The sun, yeah. Well, you don't know that, Greg. You don't know. Have you tried to go to the sun? No, you have not.
But my favorite is that a full moon is the result of gases. She's a doozy. She's been there almost 30 years, and she's the gift of insanity that keeps on giving.
First of all, I believe that every kid who's taking science at Houston's Booker T. Washington High School, first of all, if you teach science at that school, my deepest sympathies, because every kid's probably a flunk. And then when they get, the lousy grade, they say, why do I need to know this? Members of Congress don't need to know anything about any of this stuff. Why, what? Not knowing about the sun, the moon is going to hold me back in life? Not only has she been in Congress, she's been in Congress since, Pearl Jam was a thing. That's, So that's problem number one. Problem number two, and because I was thinking about this, God, we've been hearing these kind of crazy stories for a long time. Your first thought when we're emailing back and forth about this was, the congressman who was it Hank Johnson who said worried that Guam was going to tip over because so many military forces. Because as you know, islands are just kind of like these teeter-totter sort of things, like a rubber ducky in your bathtub, and that if there's too much weight on one side of the island, it might just tip. And some extraordinarily patient military official had to say, no, we have not really had many concerns about that. We've really barely looked at that issue of whether Guam could tip over, Congressman. But what Sheila Jackson Lee with this one is so she back in the 90s, 2000s. I went back and I checked. Late 90s, 1997. This was when we were visiting the Mars Pathfinder, and they're sending the Mars rover, and she's doing this tour. And according to the Hill newspaper, Jackson Lee asked if the Pathfinder would succeed in taking pictures of the American flag planted on Mars by Neil Armstrong in 1969. Now, there's a lot of things about space and astronomy and the space program, but I think most people have where did Neil Armstrong walk on? It's probably the kind of question they ask you if you had a concussion, right? That just seems like this is not, Double Jeopardy, Daily Double. Where did Neil Armstrong walk? So she got grief about that, and then turned around and said, you thought you could have fun with a black woman member of the science committee. And somebody, this was from her deputy chief of staff, Leon Buck at the time, who said that the coverage of her comment asking about the flag planted on Mars was racist. Now, she's the one who said it. Like, don't blame the reporter for quoting her. But apparently, and then looking over at Mediaite here, she put out a statement on Twitter to clarify, obviously I misspoke and meant to say the sun, but as usual, Republicans are focused on stupid things instead of stuff that really matters. Now, she meant that still doesn't clear it up. That she meant to say the sun is more manageable. No, it's not. You're actually closer to the truth when you said it's almost impossible to walk on the surface of the sun. The only people who've done that is Smash Mouth. You might as well be walking on the sun. I'm just flipping out the 90s references today. Yeah, so I guess that's like out of all the news we've talked about today, we're kind of thankful for Sheila Jackson Lee. She's ridiculous, but they kind of amusing. Like, there are terrible lawmakers, and then there are ones who are like so dense. She's almost like a star. That's how dense or a black hole. The density you see there. Anyway, God bless you, Sheila Jackson Lee. You make our jobs more interesting.
We missed our opportunity to have these scientific geniuses of Sheila Jackson Lee and astronomy somehow have a conversation with Ted Stevens years ago about how the internet worked and the whole series of tubes.
It is not a dump truck. It is a system of tubes. Who would have thought that the most accurate assessment of space policy would come from the late Jim Trafficant with the dead squirrel on top of his head saying, "Beam me up, Mr. Speaker." Go figure. He was the one who knew space best.
Jim, have a great day. Rest the voice. I'll see you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow, Greg.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today. Please subscribe to the podcast. If you don't already, tell your friends about us as well. Thank you also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch Podcast. Follow us both on X. Jim is at Jim Garrity. I'm at Dateline_DC. Have a great Wednesday and join us again on Thursday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.